Welcome to episode 172 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's April 21st, 1986, Upton Park, West Ham United against Newcastle United. And tonight's story begins not with a scoreline, but with the law book. Because for most of football history, if your goalkeeper got hurt, you had a problem. For decades, there were no substitutes at all. Yet the game always allowed one strange escape hatch. An outfield player could change places with the goalkeeper, so long as the referee was told and the change happened at a stoppage. That matters, because substitutions arrived late and in stages. First for injuries only, then more formally through domestic competitions. But by the spring of 1986, in English league football, you still had just one substitute. One. Which means that when the team's goalkeeping situation collapsed, the old law still waited underneath. Put the gloves on somebody else and hope for the best. That's the hidden engine of one of football's most absurd records. Because on this night, Alvin Martin scores a hat-trick for West Ham in an 8-1 win over Newcastle, and each goal goes past a different goalkeeper. It has never stopped sounding made up. But how did we get here? By late April 1986, West Ham were having the greatest league season in their history. John Lyall's side, the Boys of '86, were not supposed to be in the title race, but there they were, hanging around with Liverpool and Everton, playing sharp, fast, exhilarating football. Before this match, they were fifth, only 3 points behind Manchester United in third, but with 4 games in hand and 6 wins from their previous 8. This was no longer just a nice season, this was ambition. Newcastle, by contrast, were mid-table and drifting. Their previous 7 matches had featured 30 goals. That tells you everything about the state they were in. They were exciting, but in the wrong way. And they arrived in East London with a defense held together by tape. Jeff Clark, ever present at centre-half all season, was out with a knee injury. Glenn Roeder had only recently recovered from food poisoning. John Anderson was carrying an Achilles problem. Chris Hedworth, really a defender, had been shoved into midfield despite carrying an injury of his own. And then there was the goalkeeper situation. Dave McKellar was out. Gary Kelly, the backup, was not fit. So Martin Thomas, who had already damaged a shoulder and then aggravated it again after returning, he had to start. Now plays Alvin Martin on the other side of this chaos. He had made his West Ham debut in March 1978. He had been at the club ever since. He was a 1980 FA Cup winner. He was one of those defenders who seemed to belong to the furniture of the place. Serious, reliable, hard, intelligent, and central to everything. Central to everything West Ham were by the mid-1980s. He had played alongside Billy Bonds, then become one of the main pillars of Lyall's best side, and that spring he was at the peak of his powers. But he was not a prolific scorer. He'd never scored a senior hat-trick before, and he would never score another one, and certainly not another like this. The match took only 3 minutes to start bending into absurdity. Alan Devonshire floated a free kick into the area. Martin met it on the volley from close range, and West Ham were 1-0 up. That was against Martin Thomas. 8 minutes later, it got worse from Newcastle. Ray Stewart hit a speculative drive from distance, and Thomas, already hurt and uncertain, led it through him. 2-0. Neil Orr then made it 3-0 with another effort Thomas should really have handled. And just before the break came the comic cruelty of the fourth. Glenn Roeder, trying to intervene, somehow backheeled the ball into his own net. Half-time. West Ham 4, Newcastle 0. And that was effectively the end of Martin Thomas. And now the law book returns. Newcastle had already used their one permitted substitute. They could not bring on another goalkeeper. But under Law 3, they could still swap an outfield player into goal. Peter Beardsley offered to do it immediately, but manager Willie McFowle kept him outfield. Instead, Chris Hedworth, defender, makeshift midfielder, emergency everything, went into goal for the second half. And for a little while, he survived. Then Upton Park swallowed him too. Midway through the half, from a corner, Alvin Martin rose and headed in West Ham's 5th. That was his second goal of the night, and it came against Chris Hedworth. But Hedworth was already in physical trouble. In trying to deal with the cross under pressure from Tony Cottee, he damaged his collarbone. He kept going briefly, then could not continue in goal. So the gloves moved again, this time to Peter Beardsley. So there it was. Newcastle had gone from injured goalkeeper to emergency defender goalkeeper to one of England's best forwards, and all of that in one match. West Ham, unsurprisingly, kept scoring. Billy Whitehurst did pull one back for Newcastle, which at least spared them a clean sheet humiliation. But then substitute Paul Goddard scored with his first touch. Frank McAvenny made it 7. And then came the moment the whole match is remembered for. A few seconds after the restart from 7-1, Roeder handled in the area. Penalty to West Ham. Ray Stewart was the regular taker. John Lyall, thinking like a title challenger, did not want sentiment. Goal difference mattered. West Ham was still chasing the season's impossible dream. But the crowd knew. They started chanting for Alvin Martin. 3 goals? No. 2 goals, but against 2 different goalkeepers already. And now Peter Beardsley was standing there for the 3rd. Martin later said Beardsley did not exactly fill him with fear, so he took it. Bottom corner. 8-1. Hattrick. Martin Thomas, Chris Hedworth, Peter Beardsley. 1 defender, 3 goalkeepers, 1 football quiz question for the ages. But so what? This remains the whole point. The feat is unique in top flight English football. Contemporary and later retellings still treat it that way, and I have not been able to find any documented repeat. Plenty of players have scored hat-tricks, plenty of teams have used emergency keepers, but this exact combination, 1 player, 1 treble, 3 different goalkeepers beaten in the same match, still belongs to Alvin Martin alone. This was the peak spring of Alvin Martin's career. His form helped carry him into Bobby Robson's England squad for the 1986 World Cup. But no, he was not in the side for that quarterfinal against Argentina. Terry Fenwick returned from suspension. Martin dropped out, and so he did not play in the match of the hand of God and the goal of the century. That, too, is part of the strange afterlife of this story. The man who produced one of the weirdest records in football history still sits just outside the most famous England match of that modern age. Finally, the match tells us something about both clubs' season. For West Ham, this was one of the great explosions of the title run. They finished 3rd, still the highest league finish in the club's history, only 4 points behind champions Liverpool. Because of the ban on English clubs after Heysel, even that magnificent finish could not take them into Europe. For Newcastle, the night was a grotesque outlier, but not a fatal one. They finished 11th, mid-table, damaged pride, not damaged existence. Yet the match stayed with them because it distilled the chaos of their spring into one unbearable evening. And Alvin Martin himself? He stayed with West Ham until 1996, played 1 final season at Leyton Orient, and later moved into management. But for all the years before and after, all the appearances, all the steadiness, all the respectable centre-half virtues, this is the thing that turns up first in the memory. Not because it was typical, but because it was impossible. Before we go, 3 things to take away from April 21st, 1986. First, this record only makes sense if you understand law number 3 and the era, 1 substitute in English league football, but still the old permission for an outfield player to take over in goal. Second, Alvin Martin's hat-trick was not just unusual, it was structurally bizarre, a perfect storm of injuries, old substitution limits, and 1 team's total collapse. Third, West Ham's 8-1 win was more than a pub quiz curiosity. It came in the middle of the finest league campaign in the club's history, with Martin himself at the absolute height of his career. On this day in 1986, West Ham's Alvin Martin scored a hat-trick in an 8-1 win over Newcastle United, becoming the only player in top-flight English football history to score 1 goal past each of 3 different goalkeepers in the same match. That's all for episode 172 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. Tomorrow, we go to April 22nd, 1978, when Nottingham Forest, newly promoted, sensationally won the league title. See you then.